Hello, my name is Peter Fandel. I'm with Rocket Software, and I'm going to talk a little bit about bringing open source software to ZOS and how to do that, balancing speed with assurance. And I'm going to get into the details of what I mean by both of those terms here, speed and assurance. So to get started, one thing that with this audience I really don't need to dwell too much on is the continued potential of the mainframe. The mainframe remains unmatched in combining resiliency, availability, and performance combined with security. It's still a hugely important platform. So there's really no question there for those people who know about the industry. Nevertheless, there is great pressure to modernize. So businesses are seeking modern user interfaces for their mainframe applications. They need to configure and evolve their mainframe applications, the front ends to those applications, the capabilities of those applications, and integrate them with other systems that are in the cloud or on other platforms. And doing so really without open source is kind of a non-starter. Nobody is developing artificial intelligence packages for COBOL. That work is being done in open source languages. That's just one example. If you want to innovate and modernize, you need to go open source. So with open source on ZOS, this talks to some of the benefits. So you expand your access to developers. That's hugely important because the pool of developers that are experienced and comfortable and productive with traditional mainframe languages and interfaces is vanishingly small. So you really need to open yourself up to open source in order to attract new talent and to be able to leverage new talent right away so they can hit the ground running. Your typical developer you're hiring today has expectations that they'll be able to have access to the languages that they're familiar with and the tools that they're familiar with, and increasingly that's open source. It also enables you to collaborate your solutions across platform. Having a DevOps pipeline is pretty standard now on most platforms, and you don't want to have a unique DevOps pipeline on the mainframe because the languages and tools are completely different. You want to have one pipeline, uniform, and have it use basically the same pipeline, and ZOS should just be another platform. It increases the shelf life of your applications as well to move into open source. It makes your software more supportable because of the multitude of people that are using open source. As opposed to applications done in sort of legacy languages and tools where there's just a few thousand instances running in the world. It's typically hundreds of thousands of instances when you're talking open source. So open source really enables you to accelerate your modernization. However, there are some considerations bringing open source to a platform, and especially for ZOS. One is making it as easy as possible. You don't want to have the customer or the user have to jump through 15 extra hoops to leverage open source just because they're doing it on the mainframe as opposed to some other platform. So you need to have an easy experience with it. Another major concern that people have is security. Now that comes in case of security vulnerabilities is the primary one, in that you want your open source that you're running to be up to date with the latest patches. That's hugely important, and you don't want that to be compromised just because you're on ZOS. And also in terms of compliance, and in this case, compliance is security, but it's also compliance in terms of support. Many industries require your software that's in use in production to have a support contract behind it. And so that's no different if it's open source. So user experience, security, having the latest versions, and having 24/7 support are hugely important considerations in terms of getting open source onto Z. So that's why open source on ZOS is more than just porting the languages and tools so that they run on ZOS. Yes, we have at Rocket, we have ported PHP and Python, Git, and curl. But again, it's not just about bringing the open source to the mainframe. It's also about making sure that that open source is up to date with the latest security vulnerability fixes, and that the latest versions are available. Because often if you want to innovate with the latest machine learning algorithm, for example, that might be only available in the latest version of a particular package. So you really want to get up-to-date versions as well as security vulnerability fixes. And then you also want a secure delivery and deployment system. So this is particular to the mainframe because security is so important, and provenance and origin of where your developers are getting their open source is of critical importance. So you want to be able to control and manage where your development engineers are downloading open source from to make sure that that source is safe, it's been curated for ZOS. And so that's another factor with using open source on ZOS. And then finally, 24/7, 365 support. You need to have somebody to call in the middle of the night when your application goes haywire. And just because it's open source doesn't mean you're exempt from that. So it's about security, compliance, and support. So the benefits of having commercially supported open source software are what this slide is about. So again, this is to distinguish. I talked earlier about the benefits of open source in general in terms of modernization. But these are the benefits particular to having commercially supported open source, because many people off the mainframe do run open source without support, but that's very risky. So the first benefit is to eliminate the need of committing staff resources to managing your open source, making sure it's got the right version, et cetera. You want tooling that automates the version dependency checking, that automates making sure that your version of Git, for example, has the correct version of dependencies that Git requires. So you want something that can manage all of that. You also want to reduce staff downtime to fixing security issues. So you want to make sure that you've got a vendor, a source for open source that can provide you almost real-time updates to security vulnerabilities. You want it to be platform agnostic and centralized access, which basically means just the same open source you can get on Windows or Linux. You need to have that same version available on ZOS. And you want to make sure that your vendor has the expertise in porting itself in case there is a ZOS-specific issue with a particular piece of open source. You want to make sure that the vendor you're going to for that open source has the expertise in ZOS itself so they can handle that required change. It reduces the amount of time necessary to develop custom code. And by having a vendor that's got the expertise in ZOS, they usually will have forums and support that you can go to that contains other members of the community of ZOS developers using open source. So the benefits are really to increase developer velocity while keeping ZOS secure. So a little bit about Rocket Software here. We are innovators in the area of open source on ZOS. We've been porting open source languages and tools to ZOS for about 10 years now. We're a trusted provider and partner of IBM in the area of open source on ZOS. We've got engineers doing level 2 and level 3 in 4 different time zones, so we have 24/7 support across the board. We've got a fantastic, well-respected customer support organization with a 96% customer satisfaction rating, which is the best in our segment. And we've got a lot of young talent, so we understand that audience. We have a lot of young talent on ZOS at Rocket Software. Our values are empathy, humanity, trust, and love. We never let our customers or partners fail, ever. So you'll find that Rocket Software is a very different kind of software company you'll be happy to have behind your open source on mainframe initiatives. So next steps, if you're interested in learning more, is visit Rocket Software's website. We have a virtual booth. You can chat with a Rocket representative. We have a forum where the community of other users talk to each other, ask questions, help each other. It's a great place to learn about our offerings as well and engage with the community. Thank you very much.